It's deep winter, somewhere in the forests of Germania, roughly 15 BC, and a Roman legion has just made camp for the night in weather cold enough to kill a man who falls asleep in the open. And the order has come down the line, the same order that gets repeated on every dangerous night march in the empire's most hostile provinces. No fires. Not one. No cook fire. No torch left burning past the watch change. Nothing that throws light or smoke into the dark. 8,000 men are about to spend a sub-zero night in enemy territory with functionally no heat source, because the alternative, a visible line of campfires stretching across a hillside, is an engraved invitation for every hostile tribe within 20 miles to find their exact position and hit them while they sleep. Freezing to death is a risk. A fire is a certainty. So they choose the cold. Here's the thing people get backwards about the Roman army and winter. We picture discipline as marching in a straight line and following orders, some kind of blind toughness that let legionaries shrug off conditions that would break anyone else. That's not what's actually going on, and it sells them short. These were men who felt the cold exactly like you would. What kept them alive on a fireless winter night wasn't grit, it was a system, a stack of specific, drilled, standard-issue solutions built to do the job a campfire does without ever lighting one, because on certain nights, in certain places, lighting one wasn't a comfort. It was a death sentence for the entire unit. Start with why the no-fire rule existed at all, because that's the piece that makes the rest make sense. Roman commanders operating deep in hostile territory, and we have this recorded directly by men who led these campaigns, understood that a marching camp's biggest vulnerability wasn't the enemy's strength, it was being found. A legion on the move through unfamiliar, unfriendly land was already exposed, without walls, without the safety of a permanent fort, relying entirely on a ditch and a temporary rampart thrown up in a few hours before dark. A visible fire at night doesn't just keep you warm, it tells every scout within line of sight exactly where several thousand men are sleeping, how spread out they are, and roughly how many watchfires means how many soldiers. Commanders who'd learned that lesson the hard way, and some had learned it by losing men to exactly this mistake, ran fireless camps as standard procedure whenever the tactical situation called for it, whether that meant genuinely no fire at all or fires lit only deep inside the camp perimeter, shielded and doused well before full dark. So the first layer of the system, the one doing the actual physical work of keeping a body from shutting down overnight, was clothing, and Roman military wool was built for exactly this. The standard wool tunic and the sagum cloak, a rectangular length of thick wool pinned at the shoulder, formed the base layer for most legionaries, and men serving in genuinely cold provinces layered a second tunic underneath, sometimes with a focale, a wool scarf, wrapped around the neck specifically to stop heat from escaping through the collar the way it does through any open gap in a layering system. Officers and men who could afford it added fur-lined cloaks over the top. None of this was improvised for a single cold night. It was standard-issue kit, the same equipment worn on every march, adjusted in thickness and layers depending on which province a unit was posted to, because the army had learned, over generations of campaigning from the deserts of Syria to the forests of Germania, that you don't send men into a climate without dressing them for it first. Then there's the piece almost nobody thinks about, which is that a Roman legion didn't sleep as individuals, it slept in a pre-built social unit specifically engineered around this exact problem. 8 men to a tent, a group called a contubernium, sharing a single leather tent called a papilio packed in tight, shoulder to shoulder on the ground. This wasn't just administrative convenience. 8 bodies inside one small enclosed leather tent generate a genuinely significant amount of shared warmth, turning the tent into the same kind of sealed microclimate you'd get from any group huddled under one covering, holding in body heat that would vanish instantly if each man slept alone and exposed. The contubernium wasn't just who you fought next to. It was who kept you alive at night. Food had to be solved without relying on the fire that had just been banned, and the Roman answer was buccellatum, a twice-baked hardtack biscuit dense enough to survive weeks in a supply pack without spoiling, eaten cold, straight from storage, alongside dried meat, hard cheese, and whatever grain ration hadn't already been cooked earlier in the day, before the march resumed and before the no-fire order came down for the night. Commanders scheduled hot meals deliberately, cooked in daylight, before a unit moved into a stretch of territory where fires would be too dangerous to risk after dark, meaning the actual warm, calorie-dense food came earlier in the day specifically so the body had fuel to burn through the coldest, most exposed hours of the night, digestion itself generating heat long after the meal was finished, the same way a full stomach keeps you warmer than an empty one on any cold night, ancient or modern. The last piece of the system was the march itself. Roman armies didn't simply arrive somewhere cold and stop. Route and pace were planned specifically around weather and daylight, with commanders pushing units hard enough during marching hours to keep blood moving and body heat up, then timing the day's stop to leave enough daylight to dig the ditch, raise the rampart, and get every man's tent up before the temperature dropped hard after sunset. A Roman marching camp went up in a matter of hours every single night on a schedule drilled into muscle memory, because a half-finished camp at nightfall in freezing weather with no fire allowed was exactly the kind of mistake that got units wiped out. Here's where this story turns over, though, and it's the opposite of what you'd expect. With Roman forts and permanent bases, we know an enormous amount: foundations, artifacts, written records, because they were built to last and occupied for years. Marching camps are the opposite. A camp thrown up for one freezing, fireless night and abandoned again at dawn leaves almost nothing behind. A shallow ditch that erodes flat within a generation. A rampart that was never more than packed earth. No hearths, because there weren't any. No long-term debris, because nobody stayed long enough to leave any. The exact discipline that kept those men alive by hiding them from the enemy is the same reason so many of these single-night camps are nearly invisible to archaeologists today, sometimes found only from the air, as faint outlines in a field centuries later. The system built to make thousands of men disappear from a hostile scout's view worked so well it also made them disappear, almost completely, from history. So picture it again. 8 men packed into one leather tent in the freezing dark, wrapped in wool, no fire anywhere in the camp, digesting a meal eaten hours before in daylight, listening to the wind and nothing else, trusting a system built by men they never met to get them through one more night in enemy territory. It worked well enough, quietly enough, that in a lot of cases it left behind almost no trace at all. So, question for you: freezing forest, hostile territory, 8 men, 1 tent, and a direct order that the one thing that could actually warm you up is the one thing you're forbidden to light. Could you have made it through that night? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.